people.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for coming. So we wanted to do a talk back, and we came up with just a couple of questions. But to get started, I thought it'd be nice if you could just give a very brief response, like one word. Just yell it out. Anybody? What'd you think?
Tremendous.
Awesome.
We're not really looking for compliments, but
Energy.
energy.
Provocative.
Yeah.
Provocative. All right, I like that. So one of our questions was there anything in the show that surprised you? Any information you hadn't already known? Yeah.
Well, the first time I saw this presentation, not knowing that much about Zelda, I was surprised at how sad her story was. Because, again, without a lot of in-depth knowledge, I always had this impression of Zelda, the carefree flapper type. And so I just thought this is such a sad story, but sort of happy too at times. I mean, it's just a great story, very engaging.
So a little framework of the play. Aside from the conversation with the doctor, like the sort of contemporary March 10th conversations, all of the flashback, all of that were her own words, either from her stories, from her letters. Everything was taken from things she said. If you notice, come on in.
Come on in. We got started.
Sorry, guys.
That's okay. It's okay, honey. I love you. Thank you.
If you'll notice, the syntax of the language is really sort of out of order. She confuses her sentences a lot. She puts words in strange orders, and it all makes sense. But it's the way that her brain worked, and that's how she wrote as well. And one of the reviews she got from her book that she published was that it was written the way she speaks, not the way you would write.
Yeah. So any other, the question for those of you who just came in was there anything that surprised you in the play?
No. I mean, yes, but I'll get one later.
Anything you didn't know, or any? Yeah, Gina.
I just wanted to say that it's just it was such a powerful play, and it was so, the language was so rich and beautiful, particularly just the history and it just was an incredibly powerful, stunning performance. So I want to thank you for that. And the other thing is that as a woman who works in the arts, and I'm very independent and very free, it's tragic because I realized that part of it was that she was bipolar, if I'm not incorrect.
That's correct.
But the idea of not having the liberty and the freedom that we have as women now, I mean, we have a ways to go still. We make 80 cents to the dollar, all of that. But there's this it's just tragic. And if she had lived now, I don't think this would have, her life would have been this way. I'm curious
She
about
would
that.
still. I think she still would have had a really weird story, but
The big
but it would have been
difference
different.
between then and now is that they really believed that she was bipolar. She wasn't schizophrenic, which is, schizophrenia is the word that's always associated with her. But if they're looking back, come on in. Sorry. They're looking back at her symptoms and whatnot, and they're saying, no, this was just bipolar disorder, which, as we know, is very common now, and it doesn't really have the same stigma that schizophrenia does or did, or and certainly doesn't have the same stigma that mental health issues had back then. And that was right when Freud was really coming to the scene, and they were trying all these therapies. She went through electric shock therapy and hydrotherapy and all of this other stuff, when the fact is that she was manic, and she was in the thing that drove her to her first institutionalization is that she was taking ballet class literally 8 hours a day. And she would come home and she would sleep because she was so exhausted, and she'd get up and she'd go back to ballet class, and that was it. and her husband was offended by it.
And she was not a young woman when
No.
she did that. What was she, like
She was
30?
She was 28.
28.
And she was
Which is-
dancing enough. She started dancing that intensely when she was like 26, 27. By the time she was 28, she was invited to be a principal with a ballet company in Italy. So that's how much she was dancing. And her husband took offense to it, and she had a breakdown because she was exhausted, and so they shipped her off to Switzerland. And what I recently have learned in some of my readings is that he told the doctor that one of her problems was that she was not being a good wife. She didn't understand what being a wife meant. And so part of the therapy was getting her to agree that she needed to be a wife.
Shoot the doctor.
And actually, all the different hospitals she was at, it was similar, because Scott would get to them first, and Scott was Scott, you know? He didn't become famous because he was someone who would just stand to the side and let things happen. He was in charge when he walked in the room. And it wasn't until actually she got to Baltimore, and at Phipps, she had two doctors. She had a male doctor and a female doctor, and it was the female doctor at Phipps who was like, I understand what's going on here. Let's try some other things. And that sort of changed the trajectory of what she was doing in hospitals.
Yes.
Well, then, if it wasn't schizophrenia, why does the play have the voices repeated?
It's the playwright's liberty. It's, I mean, she.
Well, it's dramatic.
Yeah.
And
But
it-
it's not historically or biographically accurate
It's
by today's
right.
scholarly
The
evidence,
play was
right?
written a long time ago,
When was the play written?
in the 70s, 80, early 80s.
I don't know, I got a script here somewhere.
So it was written a while ago. I'm actually comfortable with the dramatic liberty that's taken because we have believed for so long that it was schizophrenia, and that becomes part of her lore.
And she probably believed it too after a while.
Absolutely.
I mean, they kept telling her that's what's wrong with her, so maybe she did start hearing voices. I mean, she was obviously a very artistic, sensitive person. Sometimes we are very suggestible. So.
She was also, her brother committed suicide. They think he was also bipolar. And she was scared to death of that because she recognized that she had similar leanings as he did, and, you know, easily suggestible. So, dramatic license.
Or not, the information wasn't available at that time.
Right.
Right. So were there, aside from the surprise factor, one thing we would just like to know as theater people is, unless of course you are Kate's mom or dad, or best friends, why are you here? What drew you to the theater this evening? If it wasn't a personal connection, and I see lots of personal connections.
I've seen a couple one-person shows, and I mean, I'm very impressed. Whatever's pulled off well. I think you did a great job.
Thank you.
It's just fascinating. I mean, there's something different about it than all the other shows where people interact, and it's almost always sort of biographical about somebody. And I don't know. I just always found them interesting.
Oh, thank you.
I love the movement. Was that in the script itself? The movement.
That's us.
That's what we do. That's what rehearsal's all about.
That's the director and actors, very good. That was some beautiful choreography.
Thanks.
Yeah, so in rehearsal, you know, you start with the script, and there are stage directions in a script which you ignore because, well, because those were written for a set and a different actor, and they were written after the play. When you know, you start with a fresh script, there's no stage directions in it unless you're Shaw. But you have enter and exit, and then it's our job to work together to figure out, you know, where are you coming in, and where do you go, and why do you cross on, down here on that line. And for this show, it was really fun to figure out where are these people. So Scott is always here, except once
When he's there.
when he's over there. And Philippe
out there.
was over there.
Mama was down there.
Mama was down here.
Scotty was over there.
The sort of liminal place was down here. And that's just to help the actor and to help me.
Yeah, if you sort of start with those guideposts and you know where your furniture is, then you just start. You just get on your feet and you go. And if I know I'm talking to Mama, then I know I'm going to go that way. And if I'm talking to Scott, I'm going to go that way. And you just sort of build it around that. So you don't really start with the plan. Okay, I'm going to walk down here, and then I'm going to walk over here. You just, at least not the way we work.
Not yet. And then, as part of the process, it's you find the rhythm of the play and the important lines and and in this play in particular, because it goes back and forth from real time to memory to sort of crazy place, and where does that break, and how do we want to show that breaks, and what's the important line or word or idea, and what happens when you go back to that. So that's what you do in rehearsal. And then for this particular play, we did it 2 years ago at the Fringe in DC, and then we've rehearsed this week, and then we had tech.
Okay, let's be fair. I spent a month and a half
remembering
the lines.
Yeah, we had a couple of rehearsals before. And then we had, we added in the lights and the sound at 4 today. So it was a little bit of a nail biter to be like, is it going to work? Because a lot of the sound cues sound different with these huge speakers. We've been working with a little computer, and it's like, Zelda! And now it's, Zelda! So.
I thought it was really beautiful. This is the second time I saw it. I saw it at the Fringe, and it's like seeing your favorite movie a couple years later or something. There are things that I absorbed the second time that I didn't absorb the first time, which was, I did in a different way. But the way that I can understand the anger of a patient that's being diagnosed secretly and everything, and then the shrink doesn't show up, and there's all this contraband, there's all this secret information about what's allegedly wrong with this person and that person, and the way that it was scattered, and that was part of the set the whole time, was something illegal that you did, like spreading everybody's, alleged information about themselves, and the clutter on the floor was part of the set, became part of the set. And I just noticed that more pointedly the second time. And I also didn't think that, I also noticed the blending of things that were very mundane, like lunch is going to be served at boat, and then it's also the voice of your dead mother, or the voice of your dead father, or your dead husband, and you still have things to say to this person, and the life is over, but the relationship with that person is not over. And when I heard voices like, Mom, I'm talking to you, I didn't think you were schizophrenic.
Well, I think that
I thought this was somebody with a very lively sensibility and a lot of unfinished business with people that you couldn't talk to anymore.
Yeah.
So that was really moving to me.
For sure.
Carmela, I came because Zelda has always fascinated me. And I've read several of her biographies, and of course Taya told me about the play, and that's why I'm here. Plus, she's a local character as well.
Yeah, so they spent a good part of their lives in Baltimore, later in their marriage, and they were here primarily because Zelda was ill and she was treated at Hopkins, and then she was treated at Shepherd Pratt. And I think it was mentioned before, I think Gina mentioned it, they lived at La Paix on the grounds of what is now St. Joseph's Hospital, which is where I was born.
Which is kind of
Which I think is cool.
kind of creepy and
But they had a house in Bolton Hill, which was actually recently for sale, I think, about a year ago. They lived in Towson, at La Paix. So they.
And Scott lives somewhere. Wasn't there one other place?
Yeah. So,
And they're buried in Rockville.
right. Scott's family was not from Rockville, but he had family in Rockville, and so one of the reasons they stayed was so he could be closer to his family, and then they're buried in the family plot there.
And the descendants live in DC. Did they, by any chance, see the play when you were in?
Not that I know of.
Maybe.
Not that I
They
know
didn't
of.
introduce themselves.
Honestly, beyond Scotty, who is dead as well, I'm not really certain of who the descendants are, because the name changed, because they didn't have a son, they only had a daughter, and so the Fitzgerald name got lost.
Yes.
I'm just curious, I think Shepherd Pratt was one of the first places to use both insulin shock therapy and electric shock therapy, and of course, both of those are pretty damaging to brain cells. Did they use those at that time? And
Yes,
was she one
they
of the
did.
people they used them on?
They did.
So
Yes,
they probably made
she
her more
was.
crazy by doing
They
what they did.
definitely used them at Shepherd Pratt on Zelda. Yep.
So in this show, which hospital was she at?
She was in the hospital, or
She was at Highland Hospital, which is part of Duke, was part of Duke, even at the time it was part of Duke in Asheville, North Carolina. And she was there voluntarily, so she was allowed to come and go at that point of her therapy. Dr. Carroll was her real doctor, and he had a new therapy that he was trying on patients that had the same kind of troubles that she had. And a lot of it was physical therapy, a lot of it was being very actively engaged. He used to make the patients hike up this hill, and he'd give them increments of how high they had to go and number of times they had to go up and down, because he saw that as a literal experience of trying to persevere. So, and it was working for her. There's, it's documented that she was actually much clearer headed, and she was doing very well. They were very active in sports, they were active in painting, she was allowed to paint there. And if you didn't know, she was a very, very vivid painter. There was a whole collection. It was actually at the Evergreen House at Loyola a couple of years ago.
And
But,
the sequence towards the endish where she's talking about Scott being up there and the place being filled with fire. She died in a terrible fire at that institution, and for the play, it was that night that she died, in the world of the play, because she was in a third floor.
She was on the top. Her room was on the top floor, and she was locked in her room, and she couldn't get out.
She couldn't get out. A bunch of people died, but Zelda was one of them. So that whole story in there within the play is her foreshadowing her own death, and I like to think that Scott's up there holding her up. Yeah.
Holding her up?
Pulling her up, getting her
Taking care of her
for once.
At long last.
Better late than never.
Was that part of her writing then, the foreshadowing of her death, or was this part of the author's?
I don't think it was part of her writing. I think this was the author's liberty to sort of place it on that day.
Which
How old was she when she died?
48. 47. She was going to turn 48 that year. Her birthday was just last week, actually, July 24th. Yeah. Chris?
Have the scholars been able to confirm that a lot of Fitzgerald's writings were actually hers? Is that pretty much accepted? Is that debatable?
It is accepted that he added his name to a lot of her short stories to get them published for more money. So there's a number of short stories that have both of their names on them. It is not 100% accepted that there are short stories out there that she wrote that only have his name on it. But if you go back and actually compare the writing style is Zelda's. And Scott's writing style wasn't that different from Zelda's. And actually what that leads to is we know that he lifted a lot of her writing from her diaries for This Side of Paradise. Having read and studied, oh my goodness.
Gatsby.
No, the second one. Oh crap, I can't remember it because that is awesome. The second novel, The Beautiful and the Damned,
Beautiful and
thank
the
you. Which really, really is autobiographical. You can tell in the descriptions of the character, that there are sections that are hers. And you can tell because it flips back and forth in style throughout the course of the book. That one I don't know if anyone has sat down and said, yes, this is true. But if you study it a little bit, you can make your own decisions about it.
Are her journals somewhere, like in an archive?
I think they're at Princeton. I think there is a Fitzgerald archive at Princeton that includes her stuff. But I have not seen it, so I've not been there.
Scott hit a lot of it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
What else goes on between the director and the actor? What that was a huge piece of information about the choreography. But can you speak about the other points where you
Yeah.
were guiding the actor or the actress?
Who guided who?
I know, it's a collaboration.
So it is, and Kate and I, we had a lot of conversations about stuff. One of the things that we did, can I
What,
tell
are you
them
telling
about
them our story?
Eskimoian? So there's a thing in theater called an Italian, because usually actors tend to go too slow in rehearsal. I don't know why. So you have an Italian, which is to do the whole play very, very fast. Kate has the opposite problem. Not problem, but tendency. She has a tendency to go very, very fast. And so a couple of days ago, I was like, let's do the opposite of an Italian. And we were talking about, well, what would that be? And I said, I don't know, Swedish?
So we ended up with Eskimoian.
An Eskimoian. And so as an exercise, so this is one of the things you do in rehearsal. You say, okay, just for this rehearsal, let's have you explore the language. That's really what I was trying to get to, was to try to really use Zelda's words, which paint these beautiful pictures, like William Rayford when she's talking about the, what is it,
The weepy, watery blue flowers.
that may have come from dead men's eyes.
Yes.
And I was just like, oh God, this language is so gorgeous. But when we did it at the Fringe a couple of years ago, at a Fringe festival, you have an hour and 15 minutes to load in, do the show, and get out. So we had to be very conscious of time.
Right.
And in order to do the whole show, she had to speed through it. This time.
We also cut a bit.
And
We've
we cut-
added things since
We've
then.
added things back in, and it was a more abbreviated version. But of course, when you do a show, as an actor, you get this rhythm in your body, and that's what you go to. So I was trying to sort of break that rhythm and go with the Eskimoian. Which
To slow
is
me down.
more copyrighted idea. So we
Yes.
slowed it down and discovered, I think, a lot of new stuff.
Yeah,
That
for sure.
really helped with the overall arc of the play. So you do stuff like that.
One of the fun things for me when we do that is I'll say a word and it will come out completely differently than I've ever said it before. And I've done this show a lot. And so to discover those new moments, it's especially good when you can make your director laugh in a rehearsal because she knows what it is. And so, one moment in particular is the lowest bit with the breakfast food and the beautiful
right.
blue veins. And I hit veins one day and she just starts cracking up. And I was like, oh, I guess that's funny because veins aren't beautiful. Okay, we keep that.
Yeah, so you make these discoveries, and then, as an actor, you don't want to try to do it exactly the same way, because if you do that, it won't be funny.
Right.
But you do sort of get into this headset where that's what you're thinking.
When you say you've added stuff back in, is it stuff from the original play, or is it stuff
Yeah.
that you've added?
So this play is actually 2 acts, and it's actually longer. And we, because of the timing for Fringe, we trimmed the fat, so to speak. And
We cut the hell
I
out
think
of
that
it.
I think Carmela and I agree that we really did trim the fat. This play, as the way it's written, reads like fact after fact after fact after fact after fact, and we just streamlined it.
And there's a lot of stuff that's just like, who cares? But
Yeah.
for this one, we added back in the stuff about her exhibit, her paintings, which we both didn't wanna cut for the Fringe, but we had to cut stuff, so we cut that,
The,
but we
the
got to throw
schoolgirls
it
got
back in.
added back in, because that was one of my favorite things to do.
The
The first time we did it, and it was
Yeah,
one of the last
Theo
things to get cut.
Jozioli.
Yes.
What's two questions? How long did you see it? Did y'all rehearse together for this performance? How many weeks? and also, what is the full running time of the full-length play?
We don't know.
I don't know.
Question 2, we don't know.
Probably
Probably close to 2 hours,
Probably close
including
to
an
2 hours.
Is that
intermission.
considered long for a one-woman play?
Yes.
And
Yes.
we were talking about that. So when she's down here on the floor and she's going from 50,
It's the 50 bit.
down to 40, that's where the intermission is written to be. And so we had her stay there and do that long count so that she
That's
could
so
just
I could
kind of
rest. That was my
catch her breath and get through the intermission. And because then the whole rhythm of the play kind of changes and she goes deeper and darker and it's a big shift.
Could you imagine having to come back from an intermission and do that? No.
Yeah, I was like, let's keep this moving.
How many weeks you rehearsed again?
For this
Together?
time,
Yeah.
together we had one rehearsal
1 week
in
of rehearsals.
June,
Right.
right? And then we rehearsed starting Tuesday.
Wow.
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
And you've been touring, you've been performing it this summer at all?
No, this is it for the summer.
It's been 2 years.
Yeah, we did it 2 years
For
ago.
Fringe, that was just Fringe and you didn't take it anywhere else?
Correct.
Oh,
Right.
you need to, right? I mean, is that what you're trying to do?
So my history with Zelda as a character goes back 10 years. I played her as a character in a musical about her, an original musical. And I didn't know anything about her or Scott. I had never read any of his work. And I got thrown into the musical. Yeah, you probably didn't know this.
You didn't have to read Gatsby when you were in high school?
No, I read Bernice Bobs Her Hair, which is a short story that Zelda probably wrote. Anyway, I got thrown into this musical 2 weeks before it opened as a replacement. I spent all of my free time reading everything I could get my hands on. I still had not read any Scott at that point because I was trying to read all the biography stuff of Zelda. And I, between the writing of the musical and the research, I totally fell in love with this character. To the point where I've read the books of Scott's that I've read since then, I can't read without a bias. So that probably is harmful to me as an educator, researcher, whatever.
Everybody has a bias.
Yeah. I did go see Gatsby in the movie theaters. And I have just a special place for her. So when I just moved to Maryland 3 years ago, had an opportunity to do a show in the Fringe in DC, and I said, this is the one I want to do. Hired Carmela. And we sat and we did the research together, and I have treated this piece as a little treat anytime I get the opportunity to pull it back out, read it. It is a very exhausting treat.
It is. Or just need to watch it.
Yeah, and we were talking during this run of it, this solo show of it, about looking at some of the other Fringe festivals. It's really packs up neatly.
It all fits in her car,
Just about.
except for the chair.
Oh, I think definitely.
Well, we got all of the furniture to Fringe in 2 cars. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a small piece. It's because it pre-exists. It's not. I have to get permission to do it from the author, the playwright.
Each time
Mhm.
to,
Yeah.
to the agency. and-
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
William Luce, right?
William Luce.
Bleh, he wrote it for somebody, some actress.
Olga, somebody.
Yeah, anyway, he sort of made a career of writing one-woman shows, which is interesting. And so, of course, he gets royalties, and we have to get permission from the publisher to do it.
Right. But outside of New York, it's pretty easy to get the rights, particularly to a show that is not done very often. Which
Oh,
is this
okay.
one. This show's not.
So
done
they
very
would
often.
charge, they would charge you differently if you performed it in New York rather than performing it in
It would
Toronto?
probably be the same cost, but I'd have to go through his agent as opposed to just the licensor, because it's New York, it's a different class of theater, and it's just a different market.
Where do you learn, what book would you recommend if somebody wanted to learn more about those details?
Of producing?
No, yeah, producing or, you know, that kind of thing. Is there a book?
There isn't.
A book?
There isn't.
Maybe
we should write one.
There you go. In your spare time.
There isn't one.
So you Google that information.
You Google it, you know, you might sit down with a producer or a director and just interview them
you
and find
learn.
out. Yeah.
You do it and you figure it out.
I was just thinking of the feasibility, you know, because this is so wonderful, so is it a feasibility challenge? Is that would prevent you from taking it around, if you've gotta pay the, you know, if you've gotta pay for the rights there, you've gotta do this.
Yeah. Well, you know, and then there's, you know, the money. is
Right.
always an issue.
You have to pay people, sometimes you have to rent space. Sometimes you're presented as we were tonight, so we'd have to rent the space, but I still have to pay for the rights and take care of.
Kate's also the producer, so
Right.
that's a different piece of the pie.
How much does it cost to get the rights for the show? I mean, just for this particular show.
So about $100. So $100 per performance.
Have you taped this?
We
Tonight.
just did. Yay, Erin!
I was gonna suggest you get this on film, so
Yeah.
it could get shown in a lot of places. And another thing I noticed the second time that I absorbed was that there was the motif. I mean, I didn't notice it as a motif the first time. The French was the counting backwards thing.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And, I mean, I hope you don't have to be schizophrenic to go through this sort of exercise, because I would get anxious. It's really helpful to do these deep breathing exercises and focus on counting, and backwards takes a little bit more concentration than counting forward. So I'm familiar with that exercise when you get anxious. So there was this 99, 98, 97, and then you did it a few other times. And another time when you did it, I thought it was because you were trying to count back how many years it was before when you were really happy.
Well,
When
sometimes.
Zelda was happy.
Yeah, so
Like you were counting
sometimes.
back through the years.
Right,
Like
I
the
was.
counting had a different sort of.
I was, and
significance.
sometimes the counting had two meanings.
Yeah.
So the counting was always about the hypnosis session.
Right.
So the hypnosis session went from 100 to 1. But in order to use that throughout the piece, she would, the writer would, whatever, attach those numbers to more significance than that. So, here's to Christmas 1925, 25, 24, 23, 24. Right. The counting of the hide and go seek was numbers. The room number, room 86,
The room number,
you know, that was a trigger for the numbers. Some of the numbers don't have triggers or meaning, and those are the hardest to remember.
It's great when there's something you can connect it to for the memory.
Most plays don't have that as a mnemonic.
Oh, no.
device. So
No,
that was fascinating.
that was definitely a dramatic,
But as actors, though, you find those mnemonic connections, especially if it's a one-woman show, because, you know, there's no net.
No,
So, unless anybody has anything compelling, I think we should adjourn to the bar. And